Hi everyone, delonewolf here. Welcome back for another EVE Online discussion video. In today's video, I want to talk a little bit and cover the economic numbers for February for EVE Online. I think CCP also added a couple of interesting new charts in there, so let's take a look. As always, if you want to read this dev blog or this economic report now for yourself, you have to go to eveonline.com. You can click on the news link, which brings you to the revamped news and articles website. So, all right. I'm trying to get used to it. What I don't like about it is that I don't just have an option to click on one thing or to have a clear section where all the dev blogs are, because dev blogs do tend to have a lot of the details and can be quite interesting to cover, rather than like 15% of Omega for Friendship Week, things like that. It's interesting, but definitely not worthy of a video, I would say. Overall, with this search function here, for looking back, we could easily find a dev blog if we need to find it. For now, we'll have to try to stay on top of the website, because of course the latest stuff will always be right on top, like here, monthly economic report for February 2021. That looks like this. So let's dive right in. I am going to try and cover a decent chunk of this chart, I think, because it is pretty interesting. When we look at what's happening with EVE Talk, we get a feeling of deflation. We know that the war has had this massive month here, for instance, in the month of January, and it's still raging. Stuff is definitely still happening over there. But overall, I would say the game is very in an interesting place, where CCP has also made it very difficult to make ISK, to make stuff. And we may be on the cusp as well, where CCP is going to start to slow down those restrictions a little bit and allow us to find new ways of making stuff and perhaps earning ISK in the game as well. So let's start with production versus destruction. We know here that in January we had the big super capital fight. Lots of keep stars are being destroyed and things like that as well. So thanks to the war, I would say that we are still in a really good spot. If you like a lot of destruction, we're closer to 1.5 trillion than we are 1 trillion. And so as a result, I would say we're above average for destruction still. And so if you count this big, massive jump up here as well, and then not bad here in October, overall, the last couple of months, I would say, have been pretty nice for destruction. This at a time when mining has definitely been below average. That's still pretty low, moving up just a little bit at the tail end here. My read on that is that alliances, corporations are starting to really establish their mining operations. Everything is starting to go up and running. And as a result, things also are normalizing. We know from EVE Talk that, for instance, Tritanium has gone back down to a normal average 6 ISK, for instance. There's some exceptions. Noxium Zydrine is still doing crazy stuff. But overall, I am seeing some normalizations, I would say, by supply coming online and getting back in line with what we would normally expect for, production that's going up, destruction that's quite active. And so mining prices, while they have gone up now, I'm seeing some pressure here and there. I would say mining is starting to pick up here as well. So next up we have this one, which for this month is actually pretty interesting for the net imports. Look at that here, Delve, Esoteria to Delve, basically 32 trillion ISK. This is of course when large alliances do their invasion, and so it's pretty obvious that some big parties have moved a lot of stuff into Delve over the last month as well. The other parts actually are broken down a little bit later down here in the economic report. For instance, total destroyed value by region, Delve still way ahead. That is of course the war that is still blowing up lots of stuff. So if you're wondering who's helping us get nice mineral prices, get high prices for ships, munitions and all of that stuff, it's definitely the war that's happening in Nullsec. It's super important. Then after that is actually Hisec, right? The Forge still up there as well, and then Lone Trek not doing badly in the destruction. That's of course ganking and Wardex. They do tend to congregate around big hubs and things like that. But yeah, destruction is up, and it's quite a bit thanks to the players in Nullsec doing their thing, which is actually pretty cool to see. Then we've got total mining value by region: Forge, Metropolis, Sync Liaison, Domain. So we're talking Caldari, Minmatar, Galente, and Amar Hisek. Still dominating the mining values. Very, very interesting to me. Yeah, this is pretty much what I was talking about. All of these alliances and corporations that do mining, that have players that enjoy mining, and all of that stuff, are basically establishing their bases of operations in Hisek, or they have established, I would say, their base of operations in Hisek. And this is why Tritanium has gone down a little bit, and it's now a little bit more of a game of finding the minerals that are more needed, potentially volatile, and so that stuff like Zydra, Noxium, because you need to go to low and nullsec in order to get that in any reasonable quantities. And then we still have Mexalon for Hisek, that's still doing very well as well, very big premium compared to its normal average price. And I would say that that is because a very high amount of it is needed in nullsec, and they just can't get that very easily anymore. Whereas for Tritanium, that's plentiful throughout all of Hisek, so they've been dominating Hisek systems as close as possible to their bases of operations, and so those supplies are coming online. But Mexalon is still the problem, and so the values in Hisek for mining are still very high, but there's a lot of it going on there as well. NPC bounties, we still have Veil of the Silent, that is definitely a lot higher than the rest at almost 1.8 billion, but what we're not seeing here is 3, 4, 5 times the next region. So I would say that bots and things like that are definitely struggling with the changes. Also with the dynamic bounty system that forces you to move out. Really not the best, of course, for fully automated systems. So overall, I would say NBC bounties have taken a big hit, but they've also normalized into, in all likeliness, there's more just active players that are still doing their NPC bounties rather than, well, actually, I'm seeing a lot of reports that there's still an enormous amount of botting happening, and that perhaps they're starting to organize like rotations and things like that. Let's just hope that we can keep the fight going, and I do think that it's a little bit less extreme now because of the changes that have come to the game in the last couple of months. Total production still being massively dominated by the Forge. This, I think, is quite normal because we are talking, of course, the center of trade. It's still Jita. It's still an NPC station, which has advantages. And so around there, players want to have a lot of production. It's just less travel time. That's still happening. The next up, we do have Delph, where a lot of stuff is being produced. So the war has this local war effort that is not just combat, but it really is a little bit of everything. ISK needs to be created, trade needs to happen, production needs to happen, mining needs to happen, resources need to be moved, logistics need to happen. It's a massive operation, and it's really putting Delph on the chart, obviously. The Imperium's efforts there as well. I mean, they had really created, a massive empire there as well. Total market value by region, Amar still doing quite okay, I think, well above 50,000 billion here. Then Galente, then Delph. Right, again, same thing. Very impressive to see the third largest market, excluding Jita, so it's like the fourth largest market, to actually be a nullsec region. That is pretty damn impressive right here. So Delph doing, God's work, you could say, when it comes to having that activity outside of safety. That's really where the risk takers are, where the for a lot of players, end game of EVE Online is being played at the moment. After that, I kind of wanted to move on, I think, to this one right here, is Faucets and Sinks, and after this, some of the new details will be coming as well, but this is still pretty interesting. So bounty prizes, second place, just a little bit above incursion payouts, not that much, but what's really noticeable, of course, is that the commodities market has now eclipsed the bounty prizes and incursion prizes, and I think it's gonna be, well, it's a little bit less, but it's getting close to being both of them combined. And despite that, despite the ISK faucets that are happening, overall the amount of ISK at the beginning of the month has then declined over the month of February, starting at 1336, ending at 1332. What's the reason? Well, it's not an imbalance in the game. My theory that generally in an online economy, you'll see inflation, especially in a game, because players need that feeling of getting ahead. So you'll always have more faucets than you have sinks, but active ISK delta is down as well. So that could be bans, botting accounts and things like that, but also just players that have not been active for a certain amount of time. Don't think we know exactly how CCP counts this, but overall, lower activity has now caused us to have less ISK at the end of the month as what we started with a month ago. And this, of course, is very deflationary for an economy where stuff is still being produced. And in fact, we saw that in the first chart, a little bit more mining is happening, a bit more production is happening as well. And so, of course, if you have more stuff but the same amount or a little bit less ISK, that tends to be quite deflationary for that stuff. And at the moment, you may know from Eve Talk that Plex has definitely gone down substantially in price, and PI has been the big casualty over the last 6 months or so, I'm going to say. So a little bit of deflation here and there, although there are exceptions, of course. May not feel like that to everyone because, of course, of the mining, the mineral prices that have gone up quite substantially. But overall, this is probably what's helping the price of Plex stay this low and still go down lower, despite the fact that we're already at 1 year low points. And then here is one of those new charts, if I'm not mistaken, top 6 commodity faucets over time. And this one is actually very interesting, because the top one is Sleeper Components. That's actually at an all-time high at the moment and has been increasing over the last year quite substantially. So it's pretty obvious what's been happening here. Players that used to rat a lot in nullsec have actually moved to wormhole space, where they're doing their ratting activities now. Then another anomaly is this massive spike in overseer effects. That's of course that special event where CCP made them drop like hotcakes, and where I made a video showing that the best thing to do with them is probably to try and sell them straight at the Concord station, because the price that an NPC pays for these items is going to be the best, of course. Once you start trading it on the market to players, they want that little premium to move that stuff to the NPC station and get that profit there. So that definitely caught up to blue loot all of a sudden. That's going to be a big spike, and I do think that is one of the reasons why we now do have this massive amount of commodity index or commodity ISK that has flown into the game. That is so much more now than bounty prizes and incursions. I think it's a little bit misleading. The actual production numbers are probably a little bit lower than that, or it's not that much out of sync with those two. Because this ought to be at least, well, actually maybe not for this month, but yeah, actually not for this month. That's true. This is older, right? This is February. We got a little bit of a spike. I think it's another event, but it's not as big as this one. So yeah, overall, no, disregard that last bit here. This is actually quite what's happening in a pretty normal month for EVE Online. And so yeah, wormhole ratting and actually these overseer effects have taken over ISK production, you could say, from bounty prizes and incursions quite a little bit. All right, let's move on to the next one, which I think we've seen before. I find it quite interesting, the services fees breakdown. So this does show you what type of activities have been taken over by player-created structures. And for instance, brokers' fees, so trading, still dominated up to 70% by players, NPC stations, although 30% is quite respectable. I think this is quite normal. Because GTA 4.4 of course is still dominating trade at the moment, and there is this little bit of safety, right? When it comes to trading, we are quite often talking holding on to a lot of items or very expensive items, and then when it comes to structures, you never know when bad news comes and those could be destroyed. And so, you know, I do think that at least for a sizable part of the player base, they're going to always stick to an NPC station as long as it's available, and at least almost everyone, I think, is basically smart enough to know that I'm going to hold on to at least a certain percentage of my stuff into an NPC station to you know, have that cushion, to have that safety bit. So I don't think that's going to change anytime soon, and I don't think CCP is that unhappy with it, because it is of course a faucet that they can still control. Then clone transfers are being dominated by player structures, so that's kind of normal. I think a lot of jumping will be happening to player structures because of how easy it is to just put it down where you need it, and then you can have your corporation or alliance and things like that jump clone in and jump clone out as needed. Industry job taxes, this one is kind of impressive as well. 66%, 90 billion ISK of industry taxes going to players, and about half of that, 47 billion, going to NPC stage, so a third to the NPCs, 2/3 to the players. This, in my opinion, will mean that the actual job percentage is going to be even higher than this, is really being dominated by the player-owned structures because of better efficiencies and better prices. So this ought to be always a higher percentage than this one. So this ought to be a lot more jobs as well. Then jump clone activations and installation fees. I think here it's the same story, although we are or a different story in the sense that it's probably still structures from players that dominate this, but the difference in price is probably what's causing that reverse in how much flows into NPC stations. Rentals, not really all too familiar with that. Then here we get planetary import and export taxes. That's kind of interesting as well, around 24%, 25%, around a quarter of that still going to NPCs is a little bit of a surprise. That must mean that there are still some planetary facilities that you could blow up from NPCs and then put down your own, decide on your own tax rate. And then finally, the other one that I really think is really interesting is of course reprocessing tax. 83% for players, and again that should be at a much lower rate than the 17% that is actually being taken by the NPCs, so way more reprocessing happening in player-owned structures, and I think that's kind of normal. It ties in with the story that I was talking about for mining, mineral production, and especially in HiSec. I think that this has matured, which is the reason why Tritanium, for instance, has gone back down to 6 ISK, which I would say is its normal average price, where you could sell if you want to make ISK, but I could understand someone trying to hold on for better price later down the line. It really could go either way from there. But my thinking here is that, yeah, alliances, corporations have adapted to the fact that some minerals are only in HiSec, some in LowSec, and some in NullSec, and so they have their mining corporations there, they have the players, the ships, but also the structures for reprocessing, and then of course also their trade routes for trading the stuff if they want to, or bringing it to their alliances for production. All of that has matured, and I think that's also shown by the fact that all of this is now in the hands of the players, which are looking for the best and most efficient ways of getting that stuff done. When it comes to the money supply, I don't think we have to go in too much detail. It's pretty much what you expect, of course. Not a lot happening, so pretty much flat right here. We've seen that before from the total ISK faucets, just not a lot happening. ISK is actually going down a little bit in the game if you include the players that are no longer active and the bans from bots. And then here we get velocity of ISK that's still pretty low. So what that means, I do think, is that a pretty large part of the player base is still in a wait and hold situation, right, where they're not really sure which way to go. I'm the same thing, the same way myself as well. I'm pretty much a third in ISK, a third in stuff, and a third in Plex, and then yeah, I'm kind of waiting to see what happens with EVE Online before I really decide on perhaps taking bigger gambles, doing more trading or something like that. And so the fact that ISK velocity is so low indicates that, yeah, you know, ISK does not switch hands that often. Players are more focused on what they like to do and what they're doing, and not really trading that much stuff around all that often. Then we've got our economic indices here, with still the mineral price index, of course, shooting up. But here is what I find really interesting. We actually have the secondary, so I think that's Take 2 stuff, going back down a little bit. Primary going back up, but basically normalizing in my book. And the end result, right, the consumer price index is still pretty much flat. I think this is very, very interesting. And to me, I mean, this is a bit of a personal opinion, but I would say that it shows how strong the actual player-driven economy is and how efficient it is. I do think that this shows that players can easily adapt to the mineral changes, the rating changes, as long as they are active, because all of these these changes have been absorbed, and despite that fact, I would say, yeah, all right, mining becomes more efficient, so or more worthwhile because of those prices shooting up. Well, more players start to mine, and so that gets absorbed by just more supply and more players doing that activity. Ratting, loses efficiency. All right, players move from ratting, they go into wormhole space, and they still create ISK through those mechanics. But overall, I think that the players are looking for the most efficient ways of doing what they enjoy doing, and what brings in the best bang for your buck. And so we have this actual pretty stable consumer price index, which I would say is a strong indication that a big part of the inflationary spiral that we were seeing was, well, botting, automation. Who doesn't care about efficiency? Who doesn't care about trying to get the most out of your playtime, whether it's fun or most ISK per hour and things like that? It's of course bots, right? They're just looking for the easiest stuff that they can abuse. And so I would say this is to me is a sign that a big part of the fact that CCP has done all of these changes, and despite that fact the consumer price index is pretty much flat. I mean, ships have gone up, but for instance Plex has gone down substantially in price, PI has gone down substantially in price, all of that automated stuff has gone down substantially in price. It does show that I think CCP has been quite successful in making player activity more valuable in the game, in fighting botting, and that overall, when you let the players be active in such a healthy economy, that we're doing quite okay, and that price-wise, things tend to be decently stable as we try to be as efficient as possible across or collectively, you could say. It's really fascinating. This comes as a little bit of surprise to me. I do think that CCP is very happy with that consumer price index where it's at. Anything else that we want to take a look at down here? No, this really goes too much into detail even for me. The composition of indices and things like that. It's for you if you want to dive into even more detail. Definitely go and do that. But that's going to be the look at the monthly economic report. If I had to try and summarize it a little bit right here at the tail end, I would say the war is still doing a lot of work to keep the economy turning over, to have destruction, production, and overall that's what's happening. But a little bit of deflation because of the ISK situation right now. We are while we're still creating ISK, right, the faucets are still higher than the sinks are still. The faucets are still higher than the sinks, god damn it. Not always easy to remember that one. So it's this chart. So the faucets are still higher than the sinks, but active delta has gone down, and so overall this is the reason why Plex continues to go down despite the fact that we're already, for instance, at 1 year low points right now. So it's pretty damn interesting, and I do think that CCP is going to be pretty happy with this personally, because I think it does come in line with what they wanted to do over the last year or more in EVE Online with the economy. And hopefully it does mean that CCP is now starting to think about new ways of allowing players to create stuff, to start to add again to this economy. This is really something that we haven't seen quite often before, but it's happening more and more because of the current situation. Not necessarily a bad thing, but too long of deflationary spiral can also be a bit of a problem. So that's going to be it for this one, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, I'll see you next time.